Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking on a massive, sometimes totally overwhelming, but absolutely thrilling landscape: New Testament studies. Honestly, if you've ever felt completely lost in a sea of commentaries, or, layered historical debates, or intimidating language tools, you are not alone. So today, we're going to map the whole thing out together.
Here's our explorer's map for the journey today. We'll hit 1. Reading versus studying. 2. Navigating the commentaries. 3. Cracking the language barrier. 4. The minefield of debates. 5. Context and background. And finally, 6. The meaning of the text.
All right, Section 1. Reading versus studying. A truly crucial distinction. We really need to start here because, honestly, the most persistent problem in biblical education is conflating reading with studying. It's a night and day difference. Reading the Bible in a modern translation is a beautiful, essential thing for devotional engagement. But studying the Bible, that's a totally different discipline. True study requires specific tools, a grasp of historical context, and frankly, methodological awareness. Without a working knowledge of the long-standing scholarly debates going on behind the scenes, you're going to find yourself completely lost in unexplained assumptions and incredibly dense terminology.
Moving right along to Section 2, Navigating the Commentaries. We've got to find the right tools. So, commentaries are essentially the first piece of necessary gear for our expedition, but the sheer volume of material out there, it's a huge obstacle. If you just pick a book off the shelf at random, I guarantee you'll be bewildered. You have to know what a specific commentary is actually meant to do. Take reception history, for example. This shows you the church's historical encounter with the text, right? How patristic writers like Augustine or Chrysostom read it across centuries. Now, that's an incredibly valuable scholarly good, but it is not contemporary exegesis. If you're looking for modern grammatical analysis and you grab a reception history volume, well, you're literally using the wrong tool for the job.
To help organize this massive bibliography, we can break commentaries down into tiers. At the technical level, you've got series like the Anchor Bible or NIGTC, which focus heavily on the Greek text and current scholarly debates. Then, sitting in the mid-level, which is designed more for the seminary-trained, you have really excellent reliable series like the NICNT or Blacks. And down at the lay level, you'll find the Tyndall series, focusing a bit more on devotional access. And hey, here is a super practical tip for you. Instead of spending your hard-earned money on entire commentary series, which, let's be honest, are notoriously uneven in quality, just follow trusted scholars. Look for reliable names like Jimmy Dunn, Gordon Fee, or R.T. France.
Section 3. Cracking language barrier. Let's talk about overcoming this hurdle. Look, if just hearing the words biblical Greek makes your heart race, take a deep breath. It's okay. You do not necessarily need to be perfectly fluent in Greek or Hebrew to be highly competent in your study. The source material actually outlines a really fantastic, tiered pedagogical pathway for this. Step 1 is simply a tools-based introduction. You just learn the basic syntax, what a genitive or a participle actually does. Step 2 is developing a working digital competence. By using platforms like Logos to access glossaries and community tools, you can absolutely follow technical commentary discussions intelligently, all without needing to be a master translator. And step 3? That rigorous traditional language study with all the heavy memorization? That's waiting right there for those of you who discover a true deep passion for it.
Now, for Section 4, the minefield of debates. Get ready for some scholarly eavesdropping. This brings us to the real climax of our explainer. True competence is really about learning how to navigate the major fault lines that define the entire field. Let's listen in on a few of these, shall we? First up, did Paul actually write all of his letters? This is a massive conversation in the academic world, where scholars actively categorize Paul's letters into undisputed, disputed, and pastoral categories based on shifts in vocabulary, theology, and style.
Here's another incredibly fascinating one. Why are the Gospels of Matthew and Luke so remarkably similar in certain places, yet surprisingly different in others? Scholars have literally been debating this giant literary puzzle for well over a century.
And what about the Romans? Is early Christianity a strictly anti-imperial movement out to totally subvert Rome, or are they just pragmatically negotiating everyday life within an empire? These intense, secret conversations run right beneath the surface of almost every New Testament book you'll ever read.
So, the crucial point is that knowing these frameworks completely changes how you read. Take the synoptic problem. That's the debate over the literary relationship between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. For decades, the dominant consensus was the two-source hypothesis, arguing for direct literary copying. where Matthew and Luke independently drew on Mark and another hypothetical source. But recently, scholars have introduced oral tradition into the mix. They're showing how early tradition circulated much like a live lecture that gets given twice. It's recognizably similar for sure, but definitely not verbatim. Knowing this totally relieves the anxiety you might feel over gospel variations. You don't have to defensively harmonize them, you can just engage them honestly.
Then we have the incredibly complex authorship debate. A very helpful concept here is called anonymity. This is the practice of writing within an authoritative tradition, using that figure's name, but without any deceptive intent. It's entirely different from a fraudulent forgery. Scholars genuinely debate whether Paul utilized different scribes for different letters, or if later disciples wrote in his name. There's this great anecdote in the literature pointing out that Charlie Chaplin once secretly entered a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest, and he actually lost. It's a great reminder that we aren't always as good at detecting a person's true voice as we think we are. Epistemological humility is absolutely essential here.
And that brings us to another major fault line, the Roman Empire. On one side, some scholars read the text as actively opposing empire, arguing that calling Jesus Lord was a deliberate subversive strike against the ideology of Caesar. But on the other side, we have negotiating empire. This perspective points out that Paul never explicitly names the emperor in his letters, and even tells slaves and wives to follow specific social behaviors. To them, that looks far more like complex social negotiation than overt political subversion. Now, while the book of Revelation is undeniably anti-imperial, Paul's letters present a highly debated posture that scholars are still actively trying to map out.
We also absolutely have to address a highly consequential debate for the contemporary church: women in leadership. The sources emphasize just how complex this textual evidence really is. Resolving this requires thoroughly evaluating restrictive texts, like 1 Timothy 2, right alongside explicit egalitarian evidence, like the female apostle Junia mentioned in Romans 16. You just cannot isolate individual verses here. The full range of evidence has to be analyzed objectively within its original, highly complex cultural context.
Section 5. Context and background. Stepping into the world of the text.
To truly understand those debates we just eavesdropped on, we have to zoom out. The New Testament absolutely did not happen in a vacuum. These documents were written by first-century Jews and Jewish Christians. To read them properly, we have to engage with the literature of Second Temple Judaism, the Greek Septuagint, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Apocrypha. We also must grasp Greco-Roman social dynamics, like the overwhelming importance of honor and shame in the ancient Mediterranean. And this brilliantly illustrates why, without this mandatory background, we will inevitably import modern Western categories directly into an ancient text, completely missing the original point.
Finally, Section 6, the meaning of the text. Our ultimate destination. We've talked about commentaries, Greek, scholarly debates, and background literature. But what is the ultimate goal of all this hard work? Well, the goal is not to win arguments, and it's certainly not just to gain academic credentials. As the source material powerfully states, the goal of all this formation is not scholarly credentialing. It is the meaning of the text, to follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of what their theological tradition has led them to expect. That kind of intellectual humility is profound, isn't it? It leaves us with a critical question to ponder as we wrap up. Are we truly willing to lay aside our own comfortable traditions and assumptions to hear what the text is actually saying? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you leave feeling inspired, equipped to pick up your tools, and ready to explore these fascinating debates for yourself.